Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Salufo, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with George Barnes. George recently retired as Deputy Director of NSA after 36 plus years in the federal government, and is known to everyone in the community since he's done so many important things along the way. True privilege to have George with us today. And George, welcome.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here.
No, thank you, George. And in addition to your government service, you recently stepped into a new role as president of Red Cell. So hopefully
Red Cell Cyber Practice.
Red Cell Cyber Practice. Yeah. And dare I say, most importantly, a senior fellow at the McCrary
Most
Institute.
definitely.
So, well, thank you, George. And I like to start all of these conversations. I'm a big believer in the why.
Sure.
In all of us, our North Stars.
Yeah.
And why did you pursue sort of public service, and when did you realize cyber really matters?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. My pursuit, my passion started really when I was in high school. My father worked for the Navy, and so I got introduced and exposed to government service, defense service, the Defense Department, and the outskirts of national security really from childhood. And so it was his dream and then my dream to pursue electrical engineering, which I did at University of Maryland, and came out. And instead of going back to a Patuxent River Naval Air Test Center where I had worked when I was in college, I found this place that I had not heard of until I was a senior in college because nobody admitted it existed, the National Security Agency, which was just down the street from where I went at College Park. But national security has always been my passion. Government service has been a passion. I lived that. I drew people toward it. Having a sense of purpose and importance, doing things that need to be done for our country and really for global security gave me a lot of fulfillment and feeling of meaning and purpose.
And in addition to being an EE, you also are a cryptologic engineer, right? I'm sure you weren't the only one at NSA, but
No.
When did you pursue that?
So back in the days of the early 90s, late 80s, to get to a grade 13, government grade 13, in your skill field, you had to be professionalized at NSA. And so my skill field being electrical engineering, I went toward the cryptologic engineering certification path. And so there were a whole bunch of things you had to do with respect to experience exposures, writing a thought piece or paper for a board review.
Awesome.
And it was really, it was a journey that everyone went through in their own way based on their skill community, but it really helped mature you and get you ready for the next level of leadership in mid-career.
Awesome. It is good to see someone who can marry up not only the technical expertise, but you also are well-written, well-spoken, and obviously played a major role in policy-making circles as well, and in the broader intelligence community.
Yes.
And you've got all sorts of awards. I won't have you list them all here, but safe for our audience to know have gone above and beyond in all of these areas. So one question I would ask, so as Deputy Director of NSA, which in essence is the most senior civilian
Correct.
role at the National Security Agency, in essence the COO of
Right.
the agency, and you led NSA at a very interesting point in time in history. Not so long ago, it really was, not to use the bad term, but no such agency. And today, it is leaning much more forward.
Right.
And you were at the helm of some of that change.
Yes.
So, any thoughts on that?
It was really a critical time, a pivotal time for NSA because the period of 2013 through 2016, NSA experienced a set of really a sequence of losses from insiders, people who worked within our mission. They were contractors. Several were contractors. One was a government
Some living
civilian.
in Moscow. Yeah.
One happens to live there now.
Yeah.
That was really a shockwave that hit NSA, not just from the exposures, but from the culture, as well as just from the external piece, because the NSA workforce had to all of a sudden try to stand up for what it was there to do. In light of a lot of accusations that had to be countered, they were set out there by Mr. Snowden untested. And so we went through several years of trying to actually establish who we were, what we did, what drove us, what confined our focus. And then right before I came into my deputy director role, we had suffered actually even harder losses through a couple of other insiders who stole some data and really put us in a bad place. And so a lot of things good come out of bad things, and that's what you always want, to look for good in a crisis. And one of the things that has come out of that, two things really. One is the recognition that the American public really has to know NSA and trust in it. We took that for granted at NSA, and that was the wrong. During the Cold War, it was easy to have that situation, but as we got into this age, the public really needs to understand what we do, why we do it, what drives us, what confines our focus, the authorities that really govern what we do and how we do it. So to have that understanding and trust was really critical, and those losses gave us a chance. Really, we had to reconcile the delta between the inside and the outside.
And the reality is, I used to joke that your version of external affairs were the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, and to a large extent for good reason.
Yeah.
Because part of NSA's mission should and will always remain highly sensitive and classified. But can you share a little bit in anything you're comfortable in terms of some of the culture clash? So I think bringing attention to the American public and the significant role NSA plays in defending our national security is really important. And I think NSA's done a very good job of that lately. But then you get those who steal secrets for a business, and they don't ever want to compromise sources, methods, techniques. How did that work?
Well, I think there are a few things. One of which is the fact that while the exposures made us realize that the public didn't know us, didn't trust us, and so we had to right-size that. We created a true public affairs organization, not just one that was legislative affairs, which was really the preponderance of what we had before. And that was really because of our naivete. We took for granted the fact that the public really needs to trust us. And Congress, yes, the HPSC and the CISI, which are our oversight bodies in Congress, were established in the 70s to provide necessary oversight and to be those that really knew at a classified level what we did and how we did it. That's necessary but insufficient. And so having that public connection really became critical.
And again, I think it served NSA very well going forward, because today you see a very different face of the National Security Agency supporting the private sector. And I think that, as well as the broader interagency, where maybe you had played with a number of the alphabet soup agencies, but not all of them.
Right.
And I think NSA is really leaning forward there. Anything?
Yes, a couple of things. Number one, the timing was good because, as you've referenced and as many know now, we have an established and growing public persona. Our cybersecurity mission has always been with us, but it was, again, much like the intelligence mission, it was a closed entity that served its predominant constituency, which was the national security apparatus. But as we all know, cyber has no boundaries. Everything's networked, and everything, unfortunately, is vulnerable. And so the cybersecurity mission really had to blossom and really tie into the broader public sector, but also the private sector. And the last couple of years, NSA was really able to do that. A stepping stone towards being able culturally to reconcile prior pressures there was going through what we went through in the prior years of understanding the fact that the public did need to have faith and confidence in us. We did need to stand our ground with respect to our knowledge of our authorities and boundaries, be open about things when we made mistakes. And so if you look at FAA 702, which is up for reauthorization right now, in Congress, across the board, NSA has actually been in a good place because we have demonstrated our ability to actually be good shepherds of our authorities, to have strong compliance regimes, and when we make mistakes, we're transparent about it. We never try to hide bad news.
Your leadership, General Nakasone and others, were instrumental in coming out of the shadows in some ways, and good on you. And I might note Rob Joyce played a significant role there as well, and we hope to have him on soon. But speaking of the transition and sort of the role with the public-private partnership, which, yes, NSA has always had a role with the private sector, but it's grown exponentially.
Most definitely.
Any insights as to some concrete examples of how that partnership is growing?
The most prominent and well-known, it really gets into the cybersecurity mission. And the creation, of course, in 2019, we created the Cybersecurity Directorate. But after that, a year later, we created the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, which is a component within the Cybersecurity Directorate. And the whole essence there was to actually, number one, have a facility that is out in the public, so it's not contained and it's not hard to get to. It's an aperture between NSA and the public sector. And the public sector in this case was purposely bound again by authorities delegated to NSA from the SecDef. And that was really with respect to defending the defense industrial base and critical infrastructure providers that support the DIB. And so the Security Collaboration Center really, again, continued to pull open the doors of NSA to illuminate the strength that we had, but then also the bigger strength of the marriage between the outside and the inside, as I would call it. That's well on its way. It has had untold dividends that continue to be reaped. We see it in the news. We see NSA has a broad set of cybersecurity advisories that go out routinely. Not that many years ago, those were very seldomly seen. Now they're globally accessible, for better for worse. Our adversaries are reading them just like all of the good guys. But we know that it's in our best interest to actually push out what we understand so that people can better defend themselves.
Which I think is sort of a natural in terms of what we used to think of as government lead, private sector follow. I think it's changing to an extent. Quite honestly,
yes.
Private sector or owners and operators of a vast majority of our infrastructure. I don't put a whole lot of solace in all the figures I hear, but it's vast majority.
Most definitely.
And they play a more significant role in defending what we would now consider our national and economic security.
Most definitely.
So I think that's a good direction to go in. Now that you're on the near outside, what sorts of things would you be advising CEOs, and what does the C-suite need to know about emerging technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence, machine learning? If you want to go into quantum, since you do have a cryptologic background, I'd be curious what some of your thinking is there.
Certainly. Number one, the C-suite of today really has to understand how the network age affects them, of course, in all the positive ways that brought us to where we are, but the cautions that come with it. And one of the things that government and industry have many similar pressures, but many different pressures. In the government, we're trying to actually have security to ensure that our secrets remain secret. We can actually conduct operations in a secure fashion. And so it's very clean. The whole balance is very clean with respect to what you need to spend to stay secure. If you're in the private sector, you have many pressures. And the bottom line is your viability as a company, your market, your products, your services, and all those types of things. And unfortunately, industry is faced with the fact that cybersecurity, I think, is really an inconvenience. All these threats and all these penetrations, they get in the way of business continuity.
And they cost money.
They cost a lot of money. And if I'm in the C-suite, I want to know, well, how much do I have to spend to deal with this? That spend, of course, could come from the standpoint of buying and implementing cybersecurity standards. It could come from getting service providers to help me with threat detection, mitigation, remediation. But it also has to do with, what do I spend on insurance? So if I'm in the C-suite, I want to know, what's my total cost to deal with this? All those are interconnected in varying ways, but in aggregate, it becomes a cost to the business. And so we have to really understand that.
Do you think we've built that business case yet around cybersecurity? Or are we getting closer?
I think it's getting closer, really, because we kept we keep
We have
getting
no choice.
we're getting sucker punched
Getting
every
hit.
day.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so we've been dealing with intellectual property theft for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we've been dealing with all manner of espionage, which is to be expected.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last couple of years, I'll call it a epidemic really or even a pandemic of ransomware, because ransomware is a whole different animal,
Mm-hmm.
and it not only gets to the pieces of the economy that have traditionally been hit, it also gets to the weak underbellies on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting into the municipalities who are trying to figure out how to create a budget to provide the services that they're there to provide, cybersecurity leaches money out of that. If I'm a hospital, a school, a small company, ransomware is something that's interrupting my continuity of service provision, which is a big deal.
And everyone's a target. So
Everyone's a
I don't want to lose the AI ML discussion,
Most
but
definitely.
before we go there, I do want to pull this thread.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the underbelly of our country
Mm-hmm.
and you look at where arguably the greatest needs are right now, it is going to be in our state, local, tribal, territorial,
Yeah.
SLTT, small municipalities that can provide very critical services such as water, 911,
That's right.
and the like. And also small and medium-sized businesses, which in totality, that's really the engine driving our
That's right.
innovation and our economy. So
That's right.
what very different than the Fortune 100
Most
companies.
definitely.
We recently had Tom Fanning on,
Yeah.
and he gave a very eloquent argument, and not an easy lift to be able to get a Fortune 200 type company ensuring cybersecurity is prioritized, but they have resources.
Right.
What would you recommend to small and medium-sized businesses today?
I mean, I think the first thing is that government collectively needs to come together to understand what needs to happen to better support them.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that to the point of critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. All the big companies, they have infrastructure. That infrastructure rides on goods and services provided by the municipalities in which they reside. Mm-hmm. Water, transportation, energy, the whole list goes on. Expecting that will always be there with 9 nines of reliability and availability is something we've come to expect, yet it might not always be there.
Exactly.
And to fix that is a very complex problem. There's money that's required, but there's also statutory and legislative action that has to happen. There's what the remit of the states versus the federal government are for things that are macro and touch everything. And so we have to hit it on multiple levels so that we can actually position those small businesses and municipalities to be able to actually spend maybe less money to get more outcomes.
And one of the things I keep hearing from small and medium, who do I call?
Right.
What is the what is the 911 equivalent for a cyber response? And I think we are starting to bridge some of that. But,
We are.
But more is needed,
Most definitely.
and we need to ensure that we have the workforce
That's right.
that can help support all of this.
That's
so let's go to AI, ML,
Sure.
quantum. I mean, in some ways, cyber is the new SIGINT, is it not? In
Some would
some
say.
ways. Signals intelligence.
Right. I mean, signals intelligence has been around, of course, for
a long
since the
time.
dawn of communication in electronic form.
Mm-hmm.
So cyber is really new vernacular that rides on top of that. You know, the signals intelligence mission is a piece that informs. Cyber includes informing, defending, and acting, and so it's a broader landscape. Signals intelligence is a subcomponent, you could say.
Sure. But the idea being that NSA has experience
Most
more
definitely.
so than anyone in the signals intelligence world, whether human-enabled or technically enabled,
Right.
does yeoman's work. But AI, ML,
Sure.
quantum, what do we need to be thinking there?
So first and foremost, you're mentioning some of NSA's pedigree. We're lucky, and luck isn't really a strategy, but we are lucky.
But it helps.
We are lucky as a nation that NSA has invested in big data, advanced computing, advanced algorithm development for decades. It's always been there. The first and the continued computing companies and software companies all had connections to NSA back in the 50s and on forward whenever they were created. So there's not only a pedigree, but there's a legacy and an ongoing ability that NSA has to attract talent.
Yep.
And that talent actually creates a great connection point to industry because you can have peer-level discussions, research, deliberations, developments, and deliveries that really bring the level of technology forward for our country.
Underpinned by trust, which
most
takes
definitely.
years to build,
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
that helps. Sorry.
And the good news is the NSA connections with a lot of industry in this realm, those are trust relationships. And it's not because of a mission like the intelligence mission. It's more a matter of the fact that the companies realize that national security is important. They realize that working with NSA actually helps them sometimes pursue technologies in advance of when the market's demanding them. And so that makes everyone better. Now, artificial intelligence, of course, NSA has been applying various aspects of artificial intelligence for many years now, as have the outside. Of course, in the fall of 22, when the large language models first showed themselves in the public space, that was a hallmark change in the use of AI, the understanding of AI, and the considerations that we all need to make for the good aspects and the bad aspects.
Yeah, and there are a number of ethical questions, I think.
And it touches on cybersecurity and, of course, every other sector.
You know, I don't know if you meant to, but I want to pull on a fine point there. And you mentioned application. And if you look back in time, in history, often it's not technology that changes the world, but how it is applied that changes the world.
That's right.
Either from a military and warfare standpoint, all the way back to Genghis Khan and using horses, which I understand you are a horseman yourself, and weaponry, all the way to more modern uses of technology. And I think that's where we cannot take our advantage and our current leads for granted.
Correct.
Because the reality is autocratic regimes aren't going to spend a whole lot of time thinking about ethical sorts of questions.
Right.
And I'd be curious what your thinking is
Most
there.
definitely.
And obviously it's the big dragon that I'm thinking about here, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So.
Well, I mean, one of the things that has driven me is the fact that we need to take an active role in preserving things that are easy to take for granted. And you mentioned liberal democracies versus autocracies. We have a well-functioning liberal democracy. Liberal democracies are messy. They look messy, but they're not as messy as autocracies, because autocracy, all the power is held by the leader, basically.
Well, they may be clean, they're just not fair.
They look clean from the outside, but they hide so much, right?
Exactly.
And just look at what's happened.
It's ideologically bankrupt.
Yeah, look at Russia in the last week, right? With Navalny and everything over the last years, culminating in whatever happened, we can imagine. That's a sign. Not all autocracies operate and act that way, but invariably we want to differentiate ourselves. And that comes all the way down into the National Security Agency and the intelligence community more broadly. Standing on not just what we do and why we do it, but what directs us to do it. You know, we are directed by law. We are governed. We are compliant. We have 3 entities of government that all have checks and balances. They're all important. The executive, judiciary, and the legislative, all of them come to play, and they create a path for us to do what we do with checks and balances, but also transparency. And so those things are not in place in most autocracies. They have laws, but they don't have transparency and oversight, and they apply things internally and externally in a similar fashion. As we've spent a lot of time in NSA focusing on the fact that we are totally externally focused, we do have a lot of power. That power is aligned against foreign adversarial threats, and it's governed with transparency across the government. And so those are big differentiators that have always given me the comfort to know that I was doing the right thing, but that I wasn't just unleashed to do whatever I thought I should do. I was accountable to others to ensure that I stayed within the bounds.
And you know, back to AI and some of the ethical sorts of questions, I'm a big proponent that certain jobs, only those that swear to the Constitution and the national security space should be making decisions. But at some point, those decisions may be automated. So how do we start thinking about that? And I like to say that cyber is a technological set of issues, but there's still someone behind the clickety-clack of the keyboard. That, too, is slowly changing, where you have adversarial artificial intelligence and other sorts of means. What should we be thinking there, and what should our developers, more importantly? Both of us are beyond that, so what should they be thinking?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we should think about with respect to today and tomorrow's AI is more human-machine teaming.
More than just human in the loop. It's teaming?
Teaming, they've been in the loop with machine learning. They've been in the loop because of the feedback loops by expert analysts honing the algorithms to perform those functions. But teaming is bringing it up a notch, but the people always have to be in control. Right? And so the whole aspect of, could you build an open loop system? Yes. This is why we have to have governance, policies, statutory frameworks, because we have to make sure that humans do what only humans should and can do best. AI can be trained to do things that humans can do. We have to differentiate what they can do by should do or will do.
That's a great point.
And so that's where we really have to spend time now, because these technologies are rapidly availing themselves not just for good but also for evil. And the open source nature of so much of it means that the adversarial players, whether they're nation states or non-state actors, they have these technologies. They will use them for their own purposes without governance, clarity, transparency. And so we could get lulled into trying to chase that. We have a harder job. We always have. We're an open society that is built on all the predicates that I've mentioned. We have to sustain those ideals that formed us, or else we slide down a slippery path.
And it's not worth it.
That's right. So it's harder for us to stay even. And so that means we have to be smarter. We have to the point of the C-suite, we have to embrace technology, but control it.
And even down to K through 12 and students.
Most definitely.
What do they need to be coulda, shoulda, woulda? We don't want to be in the position when it's too late. The flip side is we never want to stymie some advances in technology that can do so much for society. But there is a delicate balance.
There is a balance. And one of the things I think about school children is, on the one hand, the kids that are coming up through school and out of school today, they are so much more, I'll say, smarter, intelligent than I certainly was in our generation, because their brain has actually been exercised in ways that ours couldn't. That said, some of the ways our brains were exercised in our formative years are not being exercised now by children. And so we have to be very mindful of that balance, because there are certain fundamental things that need to happen for the way your mind operates, for recall.
Still playing in your backyard every once in a while.
Or just like doing multiplication. I mean, they're very simple things that we take for granted that a lot of people now, or navigation. Many people, if their GPS is not available on their device,
rules the world. Positioning,
people will be
navigation,
lost
timing, and signal
in an area that they live, right? And so being trained and beholden to our technology has to be balanced.
No, it's a great set of points. And I've got to do one parochial plug here. And in the state of Alabama, they established a magnet school, the Alabama School for Cyber Technology and Engineering. For transparency, I'm a trustee, but they're building that next generation of cyber warriors and defenders, but they're also figuring out how to build ethics and
that's so important.
And what we all take somewhat for granted in terms of what we learned in the past into this world, and that does, I think, deserve a lot of thinking and a lot of attention.
Yes, I mean, critical thinking, communication, a lot of foundational fundamentals. Those are what enable people to actually lead, drive, and leverage technology, not be controlled and driven by technology. And so I think we have to look at some of those first principles in our education system. We can't just push everyone into STEM without bringing along all the other pieces that allow people to actually live and contribute to society.
We do need more STEM. We need more scientists. We need more mathematicians. But I'm glad you brought that up, and not to go sort of to a unified theory. But the reality is we do need to look at how disciplines come together.
Most definitely.
And that's where breakthroughs are, and also where they diverge. That's where breakthroughs are, and universities are struggling with this. Our K through 12 is struggling with this, but we got to keep at it.
That's right. And you know, communication, writing, spoken, that is so critical. You know, everything I was able to do was really driven from the core of being able to communicate. And I had many a year fixing the writings of those under me because they didn't know how to write. They were never trained to write properly. And so that's something that we take for granted because we go right to the STEM, and we need STEM, but we need communications within our STEM community.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. I like to say technology changes, human nature remains consistent. But the reality is we got to bridge those gaps. You know, one thing, and this is going totally onto left field, so forgive me if I take us down a rabbit hole, but one of the things that I have always found impressive with the National Security Agency is there's a element of society that has been cast out by society, neurodiverse individuals. NSA has some programs where they bring such great talent if it's harnessed appropriately. Anything to shed light on that issue?
Most definitely. I think one of the things is people can contribute given the opportunity, and everybody has strengths and weaknesses. And so I think the big thing in this regard is to look at how strengths can manifest themselves given the opportunity and in the right environment. And, you know, if you look at some of the things that are plaguing children nowadays, while we might not think they are fully functional, they can be fully functional in the right environment, and they're brilliant. And so it's a matter of connecting those dots. And so, you know, a lot of the talent that NSA has and needs actually pulls from some of those communities, because the mathematical communities, they're extremely brilliant people.
Cryptographers, cryptologists over time. And I really hope others can learn from how NSA did this. And I know it's not an easy, because sometimes you need to get parents cleared. It's a lengthy process.
That's right.
But I think there is a true national lesson that could be learned on some of this.
Everyone wants to contribute somehow in their life, right? And I mean, that's
it's not only
nature.
The right thing, it's also the smart thing.
Most definitely.
Is it not?
And we need to be able to tap into that potential, right?
Yeah.
And so spending a little extra money, it seems like you're spending extra money, but you're actually investing in something that pays dividends.
Exactly. Right? And I'm sorry for but it's a unique story that I think.
Well, and I think of autism as an example.
Yeah.
We have many people. I know many people who have autistic children, and I know autistic workforce members, and it's just amazing to see how they can perform in the right environment. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we hire people with autism, and we're, you know, in many respects blind to the fact they have it because they are so impactful and intelligent in ways that others aren't, you know, and so they bring a special magic. And that's what we need.
Thank you for sharing that, George, and I hope the leadership at NSA continues to go down that path.
Sure.
Back to sort of autocratic regimes, not to do a complete, but how would you rack and stack the threat environment today? I've got my views. Everyone knows those. I've never had an unspoken thought.
Sure.
But more importantly, I'd be curious what yours are.
I mean, I think, and I won't be the first person that you interview that talks about China.
China.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the challenge is every aspect of our society could be challenged by theirs, and the way that the leadership has chosen to take China. And so we have many threats. We have Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others in their orbits, all to varying degrees of threat to us or frustration. Look what Russia's been doing, which in many respects is predictable, but it's just so terrible what they've done to Ukraine.
True.
And what they do to their own people. You know, it's amazing. They're about to have another quote unquote election, because they aren't really elections. Anybody that might try to go in against them disappears. And so that's very sad. They are a threat to us, but China is a powerful, powerful economy. an advanced technological society, 1.3 plus billion people.
They win that numbers
globally
game,
distributed and influencing. And so we purposely built intertwined economies over many, many years. And so we are reliant on each other in ways that no other two nations at that scale are reliant, right?
Exactly.
And so our policies, our national security decisions, our focus forward has to, A, acknowledge that interdependency space, and B, figure out how do we navigate forward such that we can actually reduce the threat to our liberal democracy and have communications with them so that we can try to understand each other, try to have frank conversations, and try to actually bring down risk when things escalate.
So the escalatory discussion, and the reality is it's not inevitable that we have a crash course collision, but we also need to stay true to our values and the underpinnings.
And that's the big thing. We've got to make sure we understand how we got to where we are, the ideals on which we were formed, an open and transparent, benevolent society. Those things we cannot trade away.
Absolutely.
And it would be easier if we did trade them away to actually be more equal with those that might threaten us, but we can't do that. So that means we just have to be better. We have to try harder. We have to use innovation. And, innovation is what's driven the United States. That's our secret weapon, really, is innovation, that machine, that psyche of opportunity and optimism.
That's very powerful and well said, and we cannot take it for granted.
Correct.
I mean, whether it is on the hard sciences and STEM, whether it is that convergence, I am concerned we've outsourced so many of our critical technologies.
Yes.
I am concerned we don't even have visibility of our supply chains. We all talk about supply chain security and resilience. Give me a break. We don't even have visibility of what's under the hood.
That's right.
Or at least at the firmware, software, hardware, and the like. And more needs to be done there. But the reality is not at the cost that is the unacceptable cost.
Well, and we outsourced manufacturing.
Yeah.
And so we really did it on purpose.
Advanced manufacturing's coming back, I hope, right?
But, on price point, we pushed manufacturing out of the United States. And that was a fool's errand. And we've started to learn, COVID taught us the fragility of the global supply chain.
Yeah.
And then that combined with all the other perturbations on the national security perspective and strategic competition and those types of things, we have to be more self-sufficient, self-reliant, while at the same time not closing our gates and just looking inward. We have to continue to be globally connected and oriented, but at the same time understand our fragility and build towards something that's resilient.
Well said. And I think that gets to the concerns in Guam with Volt Typhoon and others, the ability, the potential capability to impede our ability to project power, deploy forces. I think NSA refers to that as mission assurance, at least it used to. Is that an area that you see NSA maybe leaning forward beyond just supporting the defense industrial base, but in a broader way? Is that something I think can envision in the future?
Short answer is yes. The longer answer is NSA will generate insights as best it can at the capacity it has based on what's happening. The way those insights manifest themselves get brokered through other agencies and departments, partly
as it should,
partly to get into the confines of the remit of those departments and agencies, but also to, retain our sources and methods as we need to. But that being said, critical infrastructure, as we started earlier in the conversation, is fragile, and we have really ignored that fragility to varying degrees since 9/11. Right after 9/11, there was all the focus on the physical threat, understandably and rightfully. And then over time, we kind of got away from that as we got that threat more under control. And quietly but steadily, that threat was replaced in the cyber realm. And so that's something that we found through the discoveries helped by industry, really, what Bull Typhoon was and who's behind it. We don't know what they plan to do. Were they just exercising, pre-positioning, planning for a bad day?
Which is not trivial in itself.
Not trivial in itself. No matter what,
it
shows that they had the intent, the latitude, the willingness, and the ability to do things that we weren't ready for and have to get ready for.
Exactly. No, and from a technological perspective, if you're in the system, you're in the system.
Most
it hinges
definitely.
around intent.
That's right.
And it could be used for whatever purpose at what point. And that, I think, shouldn't get lost on people who might be dismissive of just espionage.
Most definitely.
Repositioning.
There's not espionage against water systems
is not normal. Yeah, exactly. Go figure out your own water. Yeah, exactly. There's clearly some intent there. And I'm glad you brought up sort of, I feel like we have this hit the snooze button, hit the snooze button, hit the snooze button. When are we going to and I really hope it is not a significant disruptive and or destructive event.
Yeah.
But what will it take that for people to really stand up?
The challenge gets down to the age-old issue of money.
How much is enough?
How much is enough? And how municipalities struggle to do what they're doing without these
on a regular daily basis.
And so that's where it takes informed governmental leadership with industrial counterparts. And I got to give credit to the current leadership at the NSA for really taking the insights as we've gotten them from government sources and industrial sources and turning that into strategy that pushes hard at the status quo. And that's not always easy because the status, there are many pressures on those affected entities, but credit to the National Security Council and the other departments and agencies for really pushing this issue and also holding to account. DOJ and FBI with other counterparts have really done a great job at holding malicious cyber actors to account, especially in the ransomware area.
We need more of that. I still feel like we blame the victim more than incur and impose cost and consequence on the bad guys, but it's getting better.
And that's also a national policy issue that will continue to grow because these non-state actors that are harbored by the likes of Russia,
primarily,
there needs to be pressure back on those governments to do something.
No, that's a great point. And safe harbor, no surprise where most of them are provided safe harbor. And
that's right.
And I've advocated, this is again going on a little bit of a tangent, but we used to have different designations for sponsors and supporters of terrorism, state sponsors. Do we need the same for cyber?
Well,
I think we do, so I'm biased, but
I think we need to. The current situation is not working well enough.
Come up with new tools.
So I think we do need to, because once you
that's our piece together next.
That's it.
George,
okay, because once you establish that, then you can put a policy framework behind it, and then you can figure the pressure points to be applied and how they're applied differently to those different.
And you can signal in advance, and people will know maybe not concrete red lines, but enough red lines that expect a.
And some are connected and some are less connected. I think the Russian government just probably loves the fact that its criminals are giving us a hard time.
Yep.
But they're not necessarily driving everything they do, or maybe not even cognizant of everything they do, but they just let it happen because
as long as they're not hitting Mother Russia.
Whereas North Korea, it's a revenue generation machine for the government. And so that's very connected. And so the policy response to those two situations may be the same, may be different. And we have to be able to consider that.
Great sets of points. I'm going to ask two last questions.
Sure.
Just one that's been with us for a while now, a lot of debate and discussion, and I probably used to be on another side of this, but should Cyber Command and NSA maintain that dual hat where you have the combatant commander and you have the DERNSA, director of NSA role, or should it be separated? What's your thought on that?
Combined. I live this. I was around
every day, I'm sure.
Every day, but I mean, really, since the dawn of Cyber Command, the JFCC NW.
You were there since the dawn of Cyber Command.
Yeah, so I was running access and collection back when Cyber Command was created. Its precursor, which was called JFCC NW, and so I've been on this journey the better part of my latter career, really. And so
More
I
than
have
on
that
the journey. You've been in leadership.
Yeah,
roles
yeah.
throughout this.
But I have that perspective in looking at how technology drives tradecraft in response to threat. I look at it in how our adversaries are presenting pressure back to us. Our biggest threats from China and Russia. China has the CSF, Cyberspace Force, and the Russia has GRU is kind of the equivalent
Military
to
intel.
the NSA Cyber Command combo, and the CSF is kind of the equivalent. And so all of our other partner nations, they have a combined situation between their cyber. Now they have a military component and a civilian component somehow, but they are invariably leveraging the intelligence piece as part of the apparatus for the military cyber forces piece. And they're all, the formulas are a little bit different, but they all leverage that signals intelligence component in their country. There's a reason there, because the technology goes so fast, the networks travel and expand so fast, speed is of the issue, and the insights that are generated by the signals intelligence machine have to be actioned in the time of relevance, which is faster than people time.
Sure.
So if you separate these things, even at our scale in the United States, we could never replicate some of the things that NSA has created over decades. There's tradecraft, there's technology, there's a lot of money that's been invested by our public in these capabilities. They need to be used for multiple purposes. And part of it is we're bound by our prior structures. The networks are driving us to a point of convergence, and so we can't be scared of adjusting our structures. We have to. It's really form follows function.
Well said. And I would have been on the other side of that argument, and I was about 8 to 10 years ago. But now that you have decision making that's been sped up through NSPM 13, and now that you actually have codified policy coming out of DOD to defend forward and a little bit of persistent engagement,
right,
I actually see the great value of keeping them together.
Most
I would have argued against it in the past because I think those that steal secrets for a business never wanted to compromise a source or a method, so we maybe never went to the Title 10 side of it.
And we've
the
matured a
military
lot
side.
as a nation.
A heck of
we
a
understand the differences in tools, techniques, and tradecraft and architecture
Yep.
for those two different use cases. But the person at the top has to make intel gain loss decisions dynamically, informed by what has the operational imperative in both regards. And the teams need to be actually together. And unity of effort and purpose by leadership, it's a human nature thing. It drives people to common outcomes. And so even if you have separate technical architectures, having people aligned against common outcomes in such a dynamic place as the net is really what's required.
And we've had some very good leadership who've recognized and acknowledged that. You, General Nakasone, Admiral Rogers. So I do think we're starting to lean a little forward, because we'll never defend our way out of this problem alone.
That's right.
But at the same time, we've got collection assets we're not going to want to burn for a good feeling, a tactical reason. It has to be strategically thought through. Last question.
Sure.
And space and cyber.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time delineating the difference between space assets and non-space assets, from terrestrial to non-terrestrial. Right. And I personally am a big advocate to designate space a critical infrastructure sector. I don't know how it can't be, whether it's PNT, you discussed positioning, nav, timing.
That's right.
Clocks.
Yeah.
Clocks rule the world. A little change there could have catastrophic effects. Everything from navigation to pretty much everything we now take for granted as society. What do we need to be thinking? Because in terms of space and cyber particular, the convergence of those two issues.
Well, first and foremost, I agree that space is a piece of critical infrastructure. PNT is the prime example of that. Everything we do, almost, except for breathing right now, relies on those things that we've come to take for granted in the PNT realm. You can't do anything now without your network. Your network is driven by the timing, and navigation in many respects, but definitely timing, right? And so P&T is a key. Also, our biggest challengers, China and Russia, they have their own equivalents because they recognize the significance of those assets on orbit and the need for resiliency and survivability and continuity of operation. And so that has to be understood and protected. Cyber connects everything because those are basically networks in the sky. And so there's invariably a convergence of, what is cyber, how does it connect, and what is space? But space, in my mind, is a critical infrastructure asset.
Awesome. And more needs to be done there.
Most definitely.
And it reminds me very much, space reminds me of cyber. It is its own domain, but it transcends all other domains, and we do need to start thinking about that, I think, differently and dare I say, urgently.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And our adversaries have been making very clear, making some strange noise, actually. I'm surprised some of the signaling that's coming out.
Well, and if you look at the rate of space launch in China, if you get the stats, it's a wake-up call. I mean, they have an extremely active space program.
And an extremely active national security mission
Most definitely.
In space. George, what questions didn't I ask that I should have?
Yeah, I think one thing that we still are wrestling with is, back in cybersecurity, we continue to evolve forward and the model gets stronger and stronger, but I think there's still a ways to go. And I've seen the power of bringing industry and government together to understand what collectively we are seeing in the threat space and then figuring out more collectively how to deal with that. But we're really still throughput limited. As long as our networks continue to be penetrated with the success rates that we see day in and day out, I think we need to continue to hammer home this ability to work together. That didn't come easy. It took a long time, and we have multiple iterations ahead of us to refine it. But I think we need to keep the pressure on ourselves and there are all types of things that keep them separate, which are fully understandable. But the magic comes from the integration and the intersection of knowledge and then using knowledge to take action. And so that's a big thing that still has a long way to go for us.
And those are very weighty, very important, and again, takes a long time to build, and we just got to push forward on that.
Yeah, and a lot of it gets into, intellectual property preservation, PII preservation, trade secrets. I was reading in the press today how there's some anxiety because there are new government requirements for insights into specific contracts from a cybersecurity realm. We have to find our way through that because being segregated and separated becomes appetizing to the adversary.
Absolutely. George, thank you for your service for all these years. Thank you for spending so much time with us today. Thrilled we can lean on that gray matter and your thoughts as a senior fellow. For others, stay safe, stay strong, stay curious, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Look forward to it.